Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. This is the third in a series covering making a master copy in oils. So if you watch the first two videos, you'll have seen my process for selecting a master copy and then analysing that master copy to try to figure out how it was painted. So I'm working on, I'll just move the tripod over a bit. I'm working on this painting by Odeon Redon of butterflies, so it's just titled Butterflies, the piece. So you can see, I think you saw it last week as well, I've basically got my iPad, or this is a Surface Pro, but any kind of tablet. It's a useful way to do copies. You can just mount it up next to your canvas, and then I've got an upright palette as well, just made out of a piece of wood clamped on, and this is all held up on my large easel. But you can paint in different ways. You could be working in a canvas. This is just pinned to the wall or to this board. But you could work on a canvas on an easel and then have your tablet next to you somewhere. I find it a bit easier to paint if the tablet's actually upright and next to the, just going to move it back here a bit. The tablet's upright and next to the canvas. It's a bit simpler because you can kind of just easily flick your eyes backwards and forwards between the subject and what you're painting, or you're painting on the subject. But yeah, so that was the piece that I chose. So it's quite different from my normal style. Usually, if you've watched any of my other videos, they tend to be more representational sorts of, well, more kind of finely rendered, I suppose, whereas this is kind of coarser. We spent quite some time last week looking at the particular quality of the brushwork in this painting. So it's thickly applied, it's kind of raked over in a lot of places. So I'm going to be going for that kind of finish with it. So it's quite different from what I'm used to. And as I said last week, the first thing I looked for was what particular colour I wanted to make my ground colour. So most paintings from most eras will have some kind of ground colour. Ground colour could be white, but a lot of the time they'll be painted on some kind of tone. So this one was painted on a brown tone, pretty close actually to, this was just burnt umber that I rubbed over with mineral spirits and some kitchen towel to kind of smooth it out, so just squeezed on directly onto the canvas, then I've pinned it up. But yeah, it's pretty much burnt umber. I think was spot on for what he used. So it means I've got a pretty similar canvas that I'm working on. His was probably slightly coarser, but this was the coarsest canvas that I had in this size available to me. If you can, you want to try to get exactly the same type of canvas that your artist used. But what I wanted to do next was figure out what's the first thing he would have done when he painted this. And this isn't the easiest piece to deconstruct that way because it's loosely applied, it feels quite free, it doesn't necessarily feel like he had a specific plan when he first started it. It's a sort of symbolist piece. He was a symbolist painter, which is sort of a prototype of surrealism. So what they painted wasn't obviously based in any specific reality. He maybe possibly used some references, but it looks more like it was painted from his head. Possibly some references for the clouds because they're quite realistic, but everything else feels kind of, it's got a dreamlike quality to it, so it doesn't feel as though he was working from a specific reference. As I'm now going to start working in the, you can just about maybe see what I'm working from. I'm going to start working in this bottom section. As I say, I'm going to kind of roughly try to block in the shapes of those rocks and little plants in the water as well, using just burnt umber. So that's all I'm going to use for today. The brush I've chosen to use is, so again, kind of thinking about how this painting worked. Just probably easier to place this here, see if it catches up. So, as I said earlier, this painting seems pretty coarsely painted. So if I zoom in, don't know if it'll quite zoom in properly. You can see everything's kind of roughly painted. They feel like thick brush strokes. So I've chosen a brush which is kind of slightly old and worn to do most of my work with this one. So I'm not going to be using soft head brushes because they'll be too smooth on the canvas. I need to use More bristly, stiffer brushes, so either aged brushes or bristles are the brushes that I need to use in order to build up this specific kind of texture that I'm looking for in the image. So while I'm here, I'll just explain. I'm going to kind of start blocking in these shapes and just kind of sketching loosely. So I'm going to use mineral spirits, just pure mineral spirits and burnt umber. Use this brush and kind of generally try to give a suggestion of the bottom section of the painting. So as I say, I'm going to paint the butterflies over the top of everything else. So I'm going to paint this bottom section in loosely. Then next week, or next session, I'll be doing the sky and trying to do that in a single pass, though I might go once back over that sky at some point. So yeah, I'm going to work initially zoomed out because I want to figure out exactly where in this space that bottom landscape is going to be. Then I'm going to zoom in and maybe start blocking in some smaller sections. So yeah, let's get started. Just need to put some more burnt umber on my palette. The main thing I want you to think about working in these pieces is that there's not going to be any set formula. So most of the other exercises that I go through, there's a specific set formula that we're working to. These are exploratory, so we're trying to figure out, how did they actually work, and it's really interesting. So you're just trying to get into the mindset of the painter. So I know that looking at this, it's not quite halfway up the picture that this landscape starts, and it kind of generally slopes down, so I can just put a very light washy stroke of burnt umber to suggest that. So maybe we're starting about there, drag across, and it kind of flattens out, something like that. And we know there's another kind of diagonal compositionally that cuts through there, forms this rock, and this line kind of comes down the center. Curves down there. Bottom of that rock. Then we know the water just kind of travels loosely across here. That gives us our body of water down the bottom. And then that leaves us this whole space for the sky above. So that's reasonably well sketched, and you could do this in charcoal if you liked. But I mean, depending on the kind of what sort of piece you're working from, there's nothing wrong with just working straight in paint. I'm basically trying to force myself to be looser than I normally would. I'm more of a sort of fussy painter, probably, relatively. So I'm not even trying to do too much construct work, because I don't feel like he used a lot of construct work. Might start generally sketching in under some of the dark shapes, so I know where they'll be. There's a bit of foliage that kind of drops down into the water. We've got so 2 levels to this rock. So there's this little rock that sits down there, then it lays over the top. We've got these kind of intersecting shapes of rocks. I'm just generally making notes of where these shapes would go, and subsequently we'll be rendering over the top. So there's a little bit of a wash drawing, kind of making notes to myself about how it's working. So I'm trying not to be too hard, too specific. So when you're definite about something, you can put a darker stroke, otherwise just trying to sketch it out. I'm going to swap to a slightly bigger brush for these bits, because one thing it isn't is particularly sketchy, this piece. It's loose, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily sketchy, it's quite definitively painted. So I just want to kind of block stuff in a broader fashion using this other brush, which is a slightly bigger, again coarse, but a bigger bristle. Block. Gone slightly too hard on that edge. I'm going to give it a little bit of a wipe back, because it actually kind of fades out on that edge there. While I'm at it, I might just kind of wipe in some of these sections. It kind of fades down, cuts across. So this section down here is going to be blue eventually. So I'm not actually going to paint, it's not really a necessity to paint burnt umber over that. I'm just going to redefine some of these lines that were lost in that smudging process. So you've got this little kind of hill here. Now that everything's kind of blocked in, I can be a bit more specific. So then this section here. So getting pretty close to what I'm looking for. Looking to get out of this initial stage. I'm going to let this dry and then work over the top. It's basically just giving us some sort of starting point. Now I could possibly start to sketch. Just have a quick look. That cuts back there. Let's So I was going to carry on, but then I just noticed some stuff I wanted to figure out. Yeah, something like that's alright. Yeah, so we could kind of start to note where the butterflies would be or where the sky is, but I don't feel like that's the way it was painted, so I kind of want to do everything in just single passes. I think probably it was painted roughly in a single pass, beyond giving myself some idea of where things would be in this first stage. I'm going to treat the sky as a kind of single day, and treat this bottom section as a single day as well. Butterflies will be kind of painted once both of those are dry. Then probably a few passes, like 1 or 2 more passes over the top, will be sufficient for this piece. But yeah, for now we're going to leave it at that. So it's pretty simple. You would do yours differently, as I say. There's no set rules about how you go about making your master copy. In this instance, I've been quite loose. So because it's just a landscape of butterflies, it's very dreamlike. I'm going more for the feel of how he painted it, not for the specific shapes and looks of each butterfly or each individual rock. Probably the butterflies actually I'll be more specific with, but certainly the landscape, it's a bit more fluid how it can be. However, if you were doing something like a copy of a very technical portrait painting, you would be going for something pretty accurate, but you would also approach it the way that artist would have approached it, which would be very rigorous. If you're picking something that's less rigorous or more expressive, say more modernist works of art like this, or this is kind of approaching modernism, you want to go looser, and you don't have to be as accurate with all your lines and that sort of thing. You want to give the effect of what they were doing, the artist, try to capture their intent. That's what really matters. But yeah, that's it for today. Next time, once this is dried, I'll be deciding between either painting the landscape or the sky, but they're going to be done in 2 different sessions. Probably I'll paint the sky, just because it'll be easier to judge the values and so on in the landscape once that bright sky's in, because I think that's where all the brightest colours are, brightest values. There's a few bright values in the flowers, in the foreground as well. Some notes of white on some of the butterflies, but generally it's the brighter part of the drawing, of the painting. So I might do that next week. And again, I'll be trying to do that in a single pass, trying to figure out which pigments he used, so that'll take some experimentation. Hopefully be quite interesting. But yeah, that's it for this week. Hopefully that was interesting, and I will see you all soon. Thanks a lot.